Hi there! Our topic today is validity. Let's try to remember what validity means from our previous courses that you have taken so far, especially from research. You can pause this video and answer this question. Alright, if you have answered the question, let's compare it with the definition of educators in this field. However, we'll look at validity in terms of language testing. Alright? According to Hughes, a test is said to be valid if it measures accurately what it is intended to measure. For example, if you design a reading comprehension test, you should make sure that you don't ask general knowledge questions. For example, you shouldn't ask a question like this. Please read the text and identify the capital city of the United States. Well, students don't have to read the text. They already know that the capital of the United States is Washington, not New York, Washington. Yeah. Now, let's read another definition by Grönland. Validity refers to the extent to which inferences made from assessment results are appropriate, meaningful, and useful in terms of the purpose of the assessment. It highly correlates with the definition by Hughes, which again means that the assessment techniques that you use and the content that you use must correlate with what you teach in your course. Now, let's study different types of validity. The first one is content validity. A test is said to have content validity if the content matches the instructional objectives or learning outcomes, which means you should evaluate what you teach. Yeah? The content of your tests should match, should correlate with learning objectives. It's that simple. So, if you teach academic writing in your course, in the final exam, students should write an academic essay. They should not fill in the gaps, they should not take a multiple choice test, they should not answer questions about theory of writing, they should write an essay. The other features of content validity are as follows. Students should perform the appropriate behavior. So if it is a speaking test, students should speak. If it is a pronunciation test, students should pronounce. They should pronounce those words. Yeah? They should not odd one out. Well, this is why direct testing is always better than indirect. The test should have representative samples of language skills. Proper samples of relevant structure should be included. Content validity also refers to quality of testing. It means that it measures knowledge. It doesn't measure, as I've mentioned before, general knowledge or some other skills that are not relevant. So this is why a test should always have relevant structures, relevant techniques, relevant content, which aligns with instructional objectives. Before we continue to study other types of validity, let's do a mini exercise on content validity. Here we have different examples of tests with high and low content validity. Please read these examples and decide if these tests have high content validity or low content validity. You can pause the video and take notes, after which you will check yourself with the keys in the following slide. Now let's check with the keys. The final exam, which only includes contents covered during the last 6 weeks, might have low validity because it didn't include as many topics as possible. Especially if it is a multiple choice test, you can ask a variety of questions on different topics that you have covered so far. Let's look at the second example. The test measures only 2 topics out of 15 in the midterm exam. Well, this test has a very low content validity because it didn't cover as many topics as it should have. A third example. The candidates at the beginner level must paraphrase the sentences. Again, this is an example of low content validity because beginner level students might not be able to paraphrase. They might not be familiar with this technique. It might be quite difficult for them to paraphrase. So the technique which is used here is not appropriate. Another example in which general knowledge questions are asked in the reading comprehension passage, again, have very low content validity. We should never ask general knowledge questions. Let's look at the last example, assigning summary and response essay for the writing task. Well, this kind of test has very high content validity if your students learned it in class during the term. If you taught how to write summary and response essay, if you practiced it, if students wrote first draft, second draft, and final draft, well, this is the best way you can test your students how to write it. It is called performance-based assessment, when students perform that skill. Another type of validity is called criterion-related validity. Well, there are 2 kinds of criterion-related validity: concurrent validity and predictive validity. Concurrent validity refers to correlation of your tests with other tests, or how your tests measure against benchmark tests. In other words, your students should score similarly in other benchmark tests. If the grades of your students match or very similar to those grades in TEFL, IELTS, FCE, it means that your tests have very high concurrent validity. As far as predictive validity is concerned, it predicts candidates' future performance and skills. In other words, if your students get very high scores in your course, and if they get similarly high grades in other courses, language courses of course, well, or if they study well in the future, it means that your tests have very high predictive validity. Now, let's look at these 2 examples of concurrent validity and identify if they have high concurrent validity or low validity. Please stop the video, read the cases, and take notes. After which you'll check it with the following slide. Okay, now let's check your answers. In the first example, the test has very high concurrent validity. In the second one, it again has very high concurrent validity. If you answered correctly, well done. Now let's look at 2 examples of predictive validity. And again, pause the video and then check your answers with the following slide. Good. Now let's check your answers. In the first case, we have very high predictive validity. In the second example, we have low predictive validity because your tests didn't predict the future performance of the students. Another type of validity is construct validity. A test is said to have construct validity if it measures the ability which it claims to measure. So the focus here is on ability. When you design a test, you should always ask yourself this question: does a language assessment accurately measure language ability? If the answer is yes, well, then your measurement or the test has the construct validity. Again, let's look at these different cases and decide if these measurements have high or low construct validity. Pause the video, take notes, and then check with the keys. All right, now let's check with the keys. In the first example, we have low construct validity. You might ask yourself a question: why? Odd-one-out technique seems to be quite reliable and valid. However, in spite of the fact that some students can identify a different sound in a pronunciation test, they might not be able to pronounce them. Years ago, I had a student, a very bright student, who was one of the best in the whole cohort of 130 students, but she could not pronounce TH sounds, like think, this, thus. Yeah. Instead of saying think, she would say think. And no matter how hard I tried to teach her this sound, it just didn't work. Well, she could identify a different sound in think, thus, therefore, and there. She could easily identify that a different sound is think. However, she could not pronounce it. All right, let's continue with the second example. Fill in the gaps with the writing in the writing test. Well, this is actually an odd writing test. Yeah, it has a very low construct validity. And students should never fill in the gaps in a writing test. They should write a whole essay. Well, you might ask a question like, teacher, but we did have this kind of exercises where we had to fill in the gaps in the text. Well, in a drill exercise, where you practice using linking words, it's quite okay. However, when you have a real test, students should perform. You should use performance assessments where students perform that skill from the beginning till the end. So it shouldn't be like a drill exercise, fill in the gaps. Students should write a whole essay. The third example, asking questions in the reading part without paraphrasing them from the text. Well, this is example from INT, national testing in Kazakhstan. You can notice that they're almost the same, or the similarity rate is about 80 or 90%. So students actually do not have to understand the text. They should only match the question with the answer. This is why you should always paraphrase questions. You can use synonyms, you can use similar structures, or even opposites. Now let's look at the last example, administering a listening test in a classroom with terrible acoustics. Well, this definitely has low construct validity because students actually might have very good listening skills, but their results might be affected by terrible acoustics, which happened to me 10 years ago when I worked at school. We had Olympiad among teachers, but the quality of the track was horrible. And because it was horrible, we couldn't understand anything the people were saying, so we scored really badly. Make sure that the quality of your tracks you use in the listening part is high quality, and make sure that students have very good acoustics in the classroom where you're going to conduct your listening test. This is very important. The last type of validity is face validity, which refers to how good people think the test is. A test should look valid, and this is why face validity is subjective. For example, a proficiency test might lack face validity if it doesn't have speaking and listening part, because we must have proficiency in all 4 skills, and for this reason IELTS and TOEFL, they have all 4 skills. They test all 4 skills. reading, listening, yeah, speaking and writing. They test all of them. Unlike APTIS. APTIS is divided into two parts, if I'm not mistaken, and they test only 2 skills. Another example. Some people believe that IELTS is neither valid nor reliable. Yeah, they think that students might score really well in IELTS, but they might not speak the language. All right. Now let's talk about the use of validity. We should always ensure that our tests have content validity. Well, content validity comes first. It doesn't mean that other types of validity are not important. Well, they are, but priority should be given to content validity. We should always validate high-stake exams empirically against some criterion, especially if it is a kind of Olympiad that you're going to use. Ideally, you should try them on a similar group of students, but of course you shouldn't tell them that this is an Olympiad exam, but you can validate them on students. For example, 10 years ago, when we conducted English Olympiad among 11th graders, we would validate our test on our students, freshmen. We would select 3 or 4 D students, C students, B students, and A students. And we would give them this test and see how well they scored. We wouldn't tell them that it was an Olympiad exam because we didn't want a leak of information. However, the results that we got showed that our test was very valid. Yeah, that it had very high content validity because D students scored badly. They got D, C students got C, B students got B, and A got A, which meant that our test had actually a very high content validity. Yeah, use direct testing whenever possible, especially in pronunciation or writing or speaking. Yeah, productive skills should be tested directly whenever possible. And tests with no information on its validity, of course, should be treated with caution. Yeah. All right, this is it. Thank you for watching and see you at our seminars.